Hello and welcome to another Roblox tutorial. This video is the first in a series where I will be making a grapple gun in a Roblox studio. Now this project was really fun to make and I had to share it with y'all because it's a super cool thing. It teaches you a lot of good stuff about constraints in Roblox and just general coding and tools. So I hope you guys enjoy. And this is the first video in a series, so just keep that in mind. You have to watch the whole thing to get it to work. And because it's in a series format, this first video is just the basic setup of our grapple gun, which may not be the most interesting, but it's necessary to get the finished product. And it does teach you many good things. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy, and comment any questions down below. So let's get started. I have here a little basic model, actually just two parts. This is going to be like my barrel and this is going to be my handle. And they're all just visual. This is just to help visualize our tool. Of course, when you're making your grapple gun, you can change this to whatever you want. But one thing you have to do is make sure all the parts are welded. So I'm going to select all the parts, go to Model, Create, Weld, and you can see if you have show welds turned on and draw on top turned on, you can see this weld constraint formed between my two parts, which is exactly what we want. So now I'm going to go create a new part, and this will be our actual handle for our gun. So let me just move this to where the player should be holding it, and we're going to resize it a little bit, make it smaller. And then actually, we're just going to take the position of our like little diagonal part and just put that as our handle. So there we go. And then we're just going to move it back a little bit so it's aligned properly. And for testing purposes, we're going to make it semi-transparent, like a 0.5 transparency. And then we're going to name this part handle. There we go. And now we need to make another part, and this will be our hook base part. And this is basically the part where our little grappling hook will be attached to, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And I'm just going to name this part base, and I'm going to resize it a little bit so it fits with our barrel. This is just preference, to be honest, doesn't really change anything. There we go. And I'm going to duplicate this part and bring it out a little bit, and this will be our hook. Because this is a grapple gun, and every grapple gun has a hook, and this will be the part that'll be flinging out and grabbing on whatever object that we touch. So now all we need to do is duplicate our hook and name this part the hook reference. And this part will be static, which means it won't move, and it'll be a reference to move the hook back to where it started once we're done grappling something. So now what we need to do is we need to weld all of these. So it's kind of specific what you have to do. So let me just show you. I have my handle selected. I'm going to just go to create weld. It's going to give me this little red arrow, and I can connect it there. And then I want to weld my base to this part right here. Did that. And then I want to weld my hook to the base. And I'm going to name this weld my hook weld. There we go. So because we're gonna need to deactivate it at some point, so it's good to have a good name. And for right now, we're going to move the hook out of the way, and then we're gonna go to the hook reference, and we're going to weld this also with the base, but we're not going to change anything because it's always going to be welded like that. And then we're going to move this back down. There we go. So that's all of our parts done. Let me just make my hook opaque. And now let me just make all the parts non-collidable, because with tools you never really want them to be collidable. So now I'm going to highlight all of these parts, press Ctrl G, put them into a model, and we can name this model gun. And then in the workspace we're going to go to the plus menu and create a tool. And we're going to put our gun model inside of the tool. And we're going to name this tool Grapple Gun. You can name it whatever you want, but that's going to be my name. And then once we're inside the tool, take your handle and drag it out of the gun. And also take your hook and your hook reference, because these are the parts that we'll be referencing a lot in our script, so we want easy access to them through our tool. So now it's time to test that everything works. Let me drop my tool into starter player, or starter pack, I should say, and then we can play this and we can see how they fit together. So right now, the tool sizing and all the parts fit together, but right now it's sideways. So what I can do, obviously if you have a tool grip editor plugin, you can use that. But what I'm going to do, which is a little bit simpler, is just rotate my handle by 90 degrees using the keyboard shortcut Control R. So I did that, nothing changed, but you can see the orientation changed a little bit. Now let's go put it back in our starter pack. You can pull it out. Now it's backwards, so now we need to rotate it by 180 degrees. This is kind of a tedious process, but you got to make sure that it's facing the right direction. So we're going to rotate it again and again. There we go. That should be good. Let's shove that back in there. Now that's in starter player, starter pack. There we go. And there we go. The part is working. So just for aesthetics, I'm going to make our handle completely invisible by setting the transparency to 1. And that is our setup done. So now that our tool setup's done, I'm going to drag my tool back into the workspace because we need to do one more crucial thing for our part setup for our grapple gun, and that is actually make the grappling rope. And so you might be asking what are we going to use? Because Roblox does have a rope constraint. And I tried making a grapple gun with a rope constraint, and it was very buggy, and it was very constraining. So I ended up just using a spring constraint, and that's what we'll be using to represent our rope and give our gun physics, because it actually is really fun, and it gives it some very nice physics. So I'm going to go to Model, Create, then Spring. I'm going to make sure to select your base first. I'm going to click to create one attachment, drag it over, and go on to the other part and click. There we go. So let's see, where did that attachment go? The attachment went into our hook, which is good. Make sure it goes into your hook and not your hook reference, because you don't want the hook reference to be the one that has the spring attached. That wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't work very well at all. So I'm going to rename our spring constraint to spring so we can reference it a little easier. And I'm also going to change the stiffness. Actually, all of these are pretty good. I'm going to set the free length to 1. All of the settings are pretty good. And I forgot to mention, make sure to take your base and drag it out into the actual model itself. I forgot to do that. Your handle is mandatory, but your base, your hook, and your hook reference, this is all just ease of use for when you're scripting it. So I'm going to drag this back in. So now it's time to start scripting. I'm going to go into my tool model and my tool, not my model, because this tool consists of a bunch of parts and then a model. Let's go into our just tool and create a module script. And this module script, I'm going to name it Grapple Gun. And I guess we could put module at the end. Grapple Gun module. And then instead of doing local module equals this, return module, we're going to change it to Grapple Gun. Then copy this, there we go, Grapple Gun. And this module won't do anything on its own, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a script, and then we're also going to create a local script. So in this script, I'm going to rename this to server and rename the local script to client, just so we know what it's doing. And we're going to just say local grapple gun equals require script dot parent. I'm going to copy this line and put it into our client. So what this line does is it requires our grapple gun module, And since it's requiring it from both the server and the client, it'll create two instances of this module. Because the server and client can't interact directly, which is why we need to use like remote events and like bool values, whatever. Because even when they're on the same module, they're not like getting the same values from each other. So just to prove that, we can put like a print statement in our module and just print hi. And if we run this, you'll see that, don't mind these errors, this is from a plugin that I have. It says hi from the server and then hi from the client. So each of them is getting our module and causing it to run. And on its own, this feature is pretty useless because they can't really interact with each other. But using the run service, we can actually detect whether we're running code on the client or on the server, which allows us to put all of our code into one module while being able to communicate with both the client and the server, which is really good for organization. May not make sense initially, but it's a really, really cool way of doing things. So at the very top of my script, I'm going to define local run service equals game get service run service. There we go. And we're just going to set up a little test. I'm going to say if run service is client, then enter, and then we're going to do else if run service is server, then, and we're going to print running from the client, and then we're just going to copy this running from the server. There we go. So if you run this, you can see that it says running from the server on the server and then running from the client on the client. So it does exactly what we want it to do, which is really nice. And we can make this a little bit better by, let me just delete these lines. We can make this a function. We're going to find local function init. And this is the initializer function for when our module gets required. It'll set everything up and get everything to work. So we have our init function. And then make sure, this is a very, very, very important step, that you write init at the very bottom of your script. And this will cause this function to run once our module is required. If you don't have this, nothing will happen ever when you're making your grapple gun, and you won't be able to do absolutely anything. And so right above this init function, we're going to define two functions: local function server init, and then above that we're going to do a local function client init. There you go. So you know where this is going. When we initialize, we want to check if it's a client. If it is a client, we run client init. And then if it is a server, we run server init. So it just like depends on which one is running which. And using this run service, it's really, really cool that you can do this. And now we just need to fill each of these function blocks with functionality. So let's add some basic functionality to our initialized functions. But before we do that, we have to define a bunch of variables at the very top of our script. So firstly, we're going to do local tool equals script dot parent, and then we're going to do local. Let's do local, if I can spell local correctly, local base equals tool wait for child base. And I'm going to do local hook equals tool wait for child hook. I'm going to do local hook reference equals tool wait for child hook reference. There we go. And let's go get our hook weld, and just to make sure, let's see, our hook weld is in our hook. So local hook weld equals hook dot hook weld, and then local, let's move this up here, local spring equals base dot spring. Base dot spring. There we go. So let's run this, make sure everything is working properly. Let's just run around. So there's no like wait for child errors, so that's good. Let's go back into our module. And now let's define a few more variables. So these are going to be the variables that are only going to be initialized by the client. So the server really should not use them. It's going to be local player, and we're going to set that to nil, and local mouse, which we're also going to set to nil. And the reason we're doing this is because we don't want the server, or we don't want the client to give variables to the server that it can't use. Because if we set this to game.players.localPlayer, the server really won't be able to use that since there is no local player for the server. So we just got to make sure that the client is the only one that can initialize these. But that's honestly just a scripter thing. You could initialize it on the server. Just make sure that you don't. Make sure that you know those variables are only going to be used by the client. So underneath our very top run service declaration, we have to define local players, which will be game get service players, and this is for our local players. So now in our client init, we can say player equals players dot local player, and then we can do mouse equals player get mouse. And the mouse is obviously going to be used to detect where we hit on the screen and what we do. And also, we need to define our tool.activated event, and let's just test if this works. So tool.activated is connect a function, and we can print hello world. There we go. So we've run this. Everything should work fine. We pick up our gun, we click, it prints hello world in the bottom right. Exactly what we want it to do. That is great. But you'll notice right now, there is no way to communicate between the client and the server in regards to our tool activation and whatever. So let's go back to our Grapple Gun module, create a remote event, and we can name this event the message event, or you can name it whatever you want, just make sure to change your names accordingly, and we can define it here. So local message event equals script dot message event. There we go. And so what we can do now is we can say when the tool is activated, we can do message event, fire, server, and this is just a test that our server can receive our event. So in our server init function, we can run message event on server event connect a function, and this function by default takes in the player parameter, which is the player who sent it, and we can just print got it. And the reason we don't have to verify the player is a player owning the tool is because this message event is unique to each tool in our game, which means that we don't have to check oh, is the player who's firing it the actual player that we want? We can just leave it like that. They may not be the safest practice, but it should work pretty well for our purposes. So we got an error. Message event is not a valid member. Maybe we have to add a wait for child. Let's see that. Wait for child. Message event. There we go. Let me just copy the name just to be sure. Yeah, the name looks fine. Let's run it again. And you can see in the bottom right, it says got it 4 times. So no matter how many times you click, it keeps on saying got it. Make sure to put that wait for child. In my testing, that actually wasn't a problem. I don't know why it's a problem now, but make sure to put that there because you need it, apparently. So that's about it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. This is only part 1 of 2, I believe, of my Grapple Gun series, because if I made this one video, it would have been like 40 minutes long. That would not have been good. I wouldn't want to watch it. You probably wouldn't want to watch it. So I'm going to split it up into 2 parts. And the next part will be finishing the scripting and making our gun actually work. This part was just a setup. I know it's kind of boring, but you have to get this done in order to get the fun stuff in. I hope I taught you a little bit using this little module setup, and using like springs and welds and whatever. But stay tuned for the next video to actually finish this project. And trust me, it's worth the wait. It's a really fun thing to play around with. You can put this in all of your games. Super nice, super fun. And yeah, so make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. And I hope you have a nice day. And goodbye.